Hello and welcome to Season 8, Episode 2 of the Cartridge Club's Game of the Month podcast, where we bring together members of the Cartridge Club community to discuss our community playthrough. If you're new to the club or are interested in participating in future months for games like Banjo Kazooie, Life is Strange, and Wonder Boy 3 The Dragon's Trap, join our community Discord, our forums at cartridgeclub.org, or follow us on Twitter at cartridgeclubNA. We love to see the hashtag Cartridge Club used when you talk about one of the games we've selected. I'm Church, and on behalf of our rotating pool of hosts, Josh, the Q-Dogs, Ryan, and Musty Hobbit, I'd like to say thank you for tuning in. Additionally, on behalf of the entire Cartridge Club community, I'd like to give a huge shout out to our Patreon Club backers, Joel Boyce, Kevin from Buried on Mars, Base Guy, Dean Lasagna from Round 2 Gaming, and Caleb J. Ross. Thank you. For October, it only makes sense to choose a horror-themed game as our game of the month, and this year we've chosen the PlayStation classic Parasite Eve. Joining me to talk about Parasite Eve is Dean of Round 2 Gaming.
Hey guys, glad to be here.
The Disposed Hero.
Hey guys, glad to be here.
And Bohan Girl 84.
Hey guys, glad to be here.
And I am glad you're all here, and let's get to it then. Parasite Eve is self-described as the cinematic RPG on the back of its case. It was originally released in 1998 and was developed and published by Squaresoft. The game is a sequel to the novel Parasite Eve and is written by Hideki Sena. So, what is your experience with Parasite Eve? Have you played it before? What system did you play it on this time?
Pretty long and frustrating history with the game, to be honest, but I'm glad we're finally talking about it. If I think back to when the Cartridge Club started in September 2013, I was petitioning for October to be Parasite Eve. And so here we are 7 years later, finally getting around to it. So I'm happy to talk about it, I guess, first and foremost. But I played it in 1998, like right when it came out. I would have been 11 years old. And I remember I was sleeping over at a friend's house. I got over to his house. His mom let me in, said my friend was downstairs. So went into his room. He was there with his friends and his brother. And they handed me the controller. And they said, Dean, we can't get past this part. Help us. And so, me, 11 years old, I can do anything, right? So I took the controller. I'm sure they showed me how to play. And the part that they had me play was the tanker escape, the final scene of the game. And I just remember running through the door and seeing sort of that flashing light on the wall and picking up the phone. And that's really the end of that story. I mean, I didn't get far. And I remember his friend got so mad. He took the CD out of the PS1 and he threw it against the wall. Yeah, I'm thinking, well, if anybody ever did that to my games. But that was my first experience with Parasite Eve. It's just that fail and everybody just getting upset. But it worked out because the next day my dad came to pick me up from his house, and they didn't want anything to do with the game, so they let me borrow it. Not the memory card, but the game itself, and I was able to start over with my own file, and I actually got to the Liberty Island fight, where you fight Eve. But at the time, I couldn't beat it myself. I was either too young or just too inexperienced, but it was maybe a year later I picked it up again. I was able to finally beat Eve, beat the final boss, and escape the tanker, and that cutscene where Aya sort of jumps off the ledge into the water, the game just froze. It just went black. The CD couldn't play that FMV. And I don't know if it was Buddy throwing it against the wall or if it was just wear and tear from time, but I tried it again this month. I still have that CD, and it doesn't play past that cutscene. So I was so angry that I was able to finish the game but not see the ending. And then fast forward a little bit, a few years, I was at my friend Kyle's house playing on his file, and we were pulling an all-nighter. And he had fallen asleep maybe around day 4. I was still playing. And not a word of lie, I remember beating the game, and I woke up at the post-credits window. Like, I don't know what happened in between sort of the final scene and the credits and the ending, but I had fallen asleep. So, like, I didn't see the ending of this game until, like, into my late teens. But I think, like, all of that crazy stuff that had happened really helped shape my love for the game, because you can approach it a few different ways. You know it's not all about grinding. You can There's a lot of strategy in how you manage your inventory or what weapons you use or how you've built up your stats. So I'm sure we'll get into that, but replaying it so many times and not seeing that ending really helped cement it in sort of my roster as favorite PS1 experiences. So this wasn't my first time playing, but I did play that old physical copy. I have two now. I have a second disc too, so I was able to beat the game using my my PS3.
Perfect.
Well, much like you, I also played the game Parasite Eve first in 1998. At the time, I guess that would have been the year for survival horror for me. I was obsessed with a certain other series that is very famous for being survival horror. And then I got introduced to this game from my cousin. My cousin kind of brought it over. He came over one day and he said, "Hey, Bohan, check this out. Check this game out." And I said, "What's this?" And I remember being so struck by the visuals, the really sort of grotesque, disturbing scenes. I was a young teen at the time. I would say about 13 or 14 at the time. And the visuals were very striking. I really loved the music. I know we'll get into that in a moment, but it really just kind of stole my attention away from Resident Evil at the time, which was quite a feat, especially at the time. And I remember I just played the game, barely managed to get through it because I didn't really sort of dig into kind of the weapon customization mechanics, that sort of thing, until I got older. And so I played it on the PlayStation back when it came out. I actually still have that same set of discs from back in 1998. They do have wear and tear, but they still work largely, so I'm very fortunate. So as recently as just a few days ago, I was playing it. Got stuck on the final boss, unfortunately, because I sort of didn't optimize the weapon that I was using on the last day. But all in all, I just had a great time just sort of retreading my steps, going through those days, listening to the music, just really getting into the stories. So it was really fun to kind of, feel that nostalgia again and really kind of dig more deeply into the game mechanics. So I'm very happy to be talking about this right now.
Fantastic. And did you play it on the PlayStation 1?
So more recently, I've been playing those discs on my PlayStation 3.
Perfect. Interesting. How about you, Disposed Hero?
Yeah, so I also played the game back in 1998. I'm pretty sure I was in the 6th grade, if I remember right. And I don't think I owned the game for a while. I'm pretty sure I rented it. I must have saw it in some gaming magazine. And I had been a fan of RPGs, specifically Squaresoft RPGs, for years before that. And so that immediately caught my attention. And I'm really big into survival horror now. I don't remember if I was back then. So I don't know if that aspect of it really grabbed me. But yeah, I mean, just like everybody else said, I mean, it's a very captivating game just immediately, and I got really into it. And I actually didn't finish it way back then. I got to a certain point in the game. It was actually the end of, I think it's day 4, the hospital, the rooftop battle, before the planes crash. I can never figure out where to go.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know if anybody else ever had that problem, but I always wanted to go to that. I think there's some stairs and a door to the top of the screen. I was so convinced that that's where you're supposed to go. And I don't know how many times I tried it. I got a game over every time. I guess I just quit playing the game or had to go back to the rental store or whatever. But it wasn't for a few years. I think I was in high school, maybe early college. But it took that long before I finally came back to it and finished the game. And I played through it a couple times over the years. It's been several years, I think, since the last time I played it. So I was really glad to revisit it again this time. And actually, I was going to play on the PS1 copy on my PS2, but actually emulated it this time because really just because a friend of mine he's kind of curated this whole suite of emulators and front end interfaces. It's just a really nice setup, so it's kind of cool to play some games through that. But yeah, this was a really good experience revisiting this game.
Awesome. And sounds just like you folks. I also originally played it when it was first released. I don't know if I got it on release day, but it was, if not on release day, it was really close. I was pretty much anything Squaresoft. Then I was all over it. And I had beaten it back then. I wasn't able to beat the Chrysler Building. I didn't have a strategy guide back then. Like, I thought strategy guides were cheating, and I frowned upon all my friends that used to pick up RPGs and the strategy guides, and I was like, come on, guys, just play through the games. I've since dropped that attitude, especially when it comes to RPGs. So I didn't know kind of like some of the ins and outs of the upgrade system. So I kind of stumbled my way through the game, was able to finish it, and I haven't played it since. I've always really thought highly of the game, but just, it's one of those things. I just never had the chance to get back to it. And I was like, this is, again, one of those perfect opportunities to me to revisit a game. And I was going to play it, my original discs on the PlayStation 3, and maybe some of you have seen this too, or maybe it's just me, but when I started playing it on the PlayStation 3, it seemed incredibly dark. Like especially the very beginning when you first are at the opera and you go up on stage. For me, like the stage was completely black. Like there was like no definition of the floor or anything. So I was like, wait, something seems wrong about this. So for curiosity's sake, I fired up an emulator, and it was like completely different, like almost night and day darkness difference, where I could actually see everything on emulation. Did any D and Mohan, did you also have any of these darkness issues with the PlayStation 3 version, or playing it on the PlayStation 3?
Yeah, I had a similar experience with that too. There would be some times where, for instance, from my memory, I would remember that there would be like a box, an item box that I recall being in a certain location, and I remember having a tough time actually seeing them, and I literally just had to like mash the X button to try to sort of find it that way. So, but I did have that issue. I did have a similar issue when I played the game on the PS3 the other day, definitely.
I usually keep my TV on game mode, which is generally darker, but I had to put it on vivid to get the maximum brightness, which almost white it out every time you walk into a battle. But it's the only brightness that would work, because you got to see these things, right? So
yeah, and I thought about hooking up like the PlayStation 2 or the PlayStation 1 to see if it was just like the PlayStation 3 emulation issue, but I can be really lazy about hooking up other systems sometimes, so I didn't confirm like if it was if it looked the same on the PlayStation 2 or the PlayStation 1. But I know when I've played other games on the PlayStation 1 games on the PlayStation 3, I thought they looked fine. They didn't seem darker. So I don't know if it's a Parasite Eve thing, or maybe that's just the game in general. I don't remember it being that dark, but emulating it, and I'm sure Disposed, you can probably vouch for this too, looked just fine in emulation.
Yeah, I didn't have any problems with it. The only peculiarity I noticed was I think there was just one specific enemy, one attack they did. I think it was the pterodactyls in the museum. They used some sort of projectile attack, and it just looked kind of glitchy to me. Maybe it looks like that in the original game. I don't remember, but I think that was the only issue I had with emulating it.
Interesting. Cool. All right, so I guess that brings us to the question of what is Parasite Eve?
It's a weird one, man. It sort of straddles a couple different genres, right? Like it definitely has a feel of like late 90s Squaresoft, almost like a Final Fantasy feel, but I don't know. Would I categorize it as a survival horror? Maybe more horror than survival, but like you're certainly not lacking armaments. You have a whole lot of guns and a lot of ammo.
Yes.
I guess there's inventory management that you have to worry about, but even to that extent, you're not playing Tetris in your pockets like some of the Resident Evil games. So it's hard, right?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people kind of want to say survival horror JRPG, and for that discussion, I just pulled a wiki, the wiki description of what a survival horror game is, And the wiki says that survival horror refers to a subgenre of action-adventure video games that include horror game elements. The player character is vulnerable and underarmed, which puts an emphasis on puzzle solving and evasion rather than the player taking an offensive strategy. And that description's almost opposite of Parasite Eve in the the underarmed. Like, I mean, especially by the end of the first playthrough, like, you know, I had like plus, you know, 75 to damage and 40 round magazine on my shotgun. Like, not so much underarmed there, and no puzzle solving really in this game.
Yeah, I is definitely like a one-woman army by the end of everything, so definitely not.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely more horror than the survival. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think it's a pretty unique take on the JRPG. But I think for some of the more finer systems or the battle mechanics and stuff, we'll get to that shortly here. But I wanted to talk about, so this month on the Cartridge Club NA Twitter account, there was some polls for community members to partake in, and we'll have a couple polls that I'll share the results with throughout this episode, and we will talk about the first one here. Fans have been clamoring for more Parasite Eve for years. How do you think Square Enix should revisit the franchise? And the question, or the answers were remake, reboot, sequel, or leave it alone. And we had 73 votes, and remake overwhelmingly won that poll at 65.8%. Then sequel at 13.7%. Reboot at 11%, and leave it alone at 9.6%. So I think that's a pretty interesting response, especially I think video games and movies can sometimes be different when it comes to people's desire for remakes, where a lot of times in movies people are like, no, do not, whatever you do, don't remake a movie. But it seems like, especially over the last few years with some of these like high quality remakes, really get the inkling that a lot of people are a little bit more, they see the benefit, besides not just graphical enhancements, but mechanical enhancements.
Yeah, I think if you were to run this poll, 2-3 years ago, the results would be a little different. But I think after the success of Final Fantasy VII Remake or the Resident Evil 2 Remake, I mean, they're generally praised pretty highly. And with Parasite Eve having so many similarities at the time with Final Fantasy VII, I think I can a lot more clearly now see how they can reuse some of those elements that they used for the Final Fantasy VII Remake in a proposed Parasite Eve 1. And following the hashtag a little closely on Twitter this month, there's a lot of people that are just clamoring for this. Like on a daily basis, there's dozens, if not hundreds, of people asking for a Parasite Eve remake. So, I mean, Square hears them. They're tagged in all the posts. So, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
For sure. So with Parasite Eve, we already mentioned Aya, and of course she's our lead character. I think it'd be a good idea to kind of talk about the characters, the story, what's going on in Parasite Eve, who are the main players, what can people kind of expect for the story. So what do you think, Disposed?
Yeah, it's a weird one. It kind of starts off with Aya going to the opera and everybody suddenly bursting into flames, and has to do with mitochondria. And I'm not sure if Eve has the best understanding of biology, because I don't think that's quite how it works. But yeah, I've always just thought this game had such a unique and interesting story, and I just can't really think of anything quite like this.
Yeah, definitely a unique outlier in regards to the story. Very, very few games. There's other games that will focus on like genetics, viruses, but never the actual like cells of the body revolting or whatever is going on in the story.
Yeah, I think this playthrough was the first time I actually sat down with like a pen and paper and was physically taking notes on questions I had, because up until this point, this playthrough, I still didn't really understand what was going on. I think you sort of zone out a little bit after you hear mitochondria like the 100th time. You're just like, oh god, like I just don't understand what's going on. But you start writing down questions like, why is Aya immune, or like what's so special about Melissa's body, or what was the ultimate being supposed to do. And so as you're playing through, you're starting to realize that little bits of dialogue that seem fairly throwaway are pretty important. And after reading the book, there's a pretty intricate story here that I think is often overlooked because of the science behind it. But it was super fun to just take notes throughout the whole game and piece together a pretty cohesive story. It was good.
Yeah, and kind of onto that, I kind of thought it was so interesting that, this game was made and there's a lot of terminology in it. We could talk about whether some of it is used technically correctly or not, but a lot of terminology, a lot of references. Like, for instance, they reference Richard Dawkins at one point. Mm-hmm. I always found it to be so interesting how very sort of, even though it's essentially science fiction when you think about the story, how very sort of technically heavy in a way the game is with the dialogue. A lot of mention of course, mitochondria, but of course they do mention mutation and how the mechanism behind regulated cell death, apoptosis, that sort of thing. So I remember being struck by that being so heavily emphasized in a lot of the dialogue, that I thought it was pretty interesting, pretty gutsy move to kind of have a lot of that in the dialogue throughout the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I again, like mid to late 90s Squaresoft was so bold with their choices. Like I don't see Parasite Eve being a game that would get made today. There's so much risk involved. The story itself, considering back when the game was released, even the setting was, especially for RPGs, pretty unique. Considering all the counterparts, usually they're fantasy based or future sci-fi. Very few games were actually like modern settings, and blending it all together so well. It's part of the reason why I love Squaresoft as much as I do, especially on the PlayStation 1.
Yeah, I think they had a lot of credit to play with after the success of Final Fantasy VII. Because right after it, we saw Urgeist, we saw Einhander, we saw all of these just weird, bizarre type of games coming out of Squaresoft that we've never seen Square do before. So they were definitely testing the waters to see what stuck in North America. And I think you're totally right. Nowadays, where Square is still making AAA games, but not to the same accolade that they were in the late 90s. I don't think they have the same risk thresholds that they did back then.
Mm.
So, but yeah, I love the story of this game. It's so good.
So maybe we should touch on some of the characters. So we did mention Aya. So who is Aya? What's her deal? What's going on here?
I just want to say I love Aya. I love that she has this, I feel like she's a relatively well-rounded character, just in the sense that she is tough. Like, she sprung into action immediately day one when everyone was bursting into flames. She's trying to, she has to process everything that's going on. And then meanwhile, she's also, a detective. She's also an NYPD detective. And she has to, she just sort of springs into action to try to save as many people as she can. I love when she even shoves her date out of there when he's just like frozen in panic. So she has this, I like the balance in her between her toughness, I guess it's her training, her NYPD training. Plus, there's also a vulnerability. Like she's not one note. She's not, I'm just tough. No, she is also, there's a vulnerability because she also has to deal with, as you progress, her trying to figure out why is it that she can sort of rebel or resist Eve's Eve's power. So it's also her just sort of struggling with, why me? Why am I the only one who has that ability to resist Eve? Does this mean I'm a monster? That sort of thing. So I really thought the game did a good job of kind of balancing Aya as this tough person who can hold her own, as well as kind of vulnerable and just, sort of confused at times. What's going on? I don't know why this is happening, that sort of thing. So I really like her as a character. She's very interesting to me.
That she hasn't appeared anywhere else aside from her own franchise. Like with how prominently PlayStation in general has brought back legacy characters for things like their All-Stars or just in cameos in other games. Aya has sort of been trapped inside the Parasite Eve universe, and I'm sure there's licensing behind that in general, but she's just such a great character. I'd really like to see her come back in something, if not a remake.
So how about our main antagonist, Eve or Melissa? Maybe, I don't know, Maya fits in there. That might be spoilerish, but Disposed, who's Eve and what's going on with her?
Well, I guess I'll start with, I'll just say Melissa is the actress that performs at the opera, and you find out later that she gets a kidney transplant from Aya's sister Maya, which is sort of where where Eve sort of came from. She's been sort of I'm not even sure how to describe it, sort of living inside of Melissa all this time, but it's on Christmas Eve at this opera that Eve sort of comes out, and she like you said, the main antagonist, and she not even sure how to explain what all happens, but she just has these powers. She can mutate all these animals, people around her burst into flames. It all has to do with mitochondria, and mitochondria is rebelling against humanity. Supposedly it's been evolving at a faster rate than humans have, and it's trying to dominate humanity as the dominant species or something, and it gets pretty bizarre.
Yeah.
But Eve, she does these pretty grotesque transformations. She's trying to give birth to the ultimate being, because apparently Melissa's body is sort of temporary. It'll die off, so she has to give birth to a new being, and that's sort of her goal here.
Speaking of the ultimate being, the whole story arc or getting there, I thought was pretty interesting, and again, kind of daring story-wise, where how many games do they talk about fertility clinics and artificial insemination, and are actually stealing samples and using samples? Like, there's so many unique qualities about this game, like front to back, through and through. So good. So
it's funny you mentioned that, because I had a funny experience with that. Playing this game on and off for over 20 years now. I'm kind of used to sort of the basic elements of the story, but I was actually live streaming it the other day, and I forgot that some people just never played this game. So there was somebody in my channel who, when I was playing it, was really struck by, oh gosh, they're talking about sperm? Oh gosh, they're talking about impregnation. I'm like, oh yeah, they do in this game. So it's just amazing to me. I agree with that. In my experience, I haven't really encountered those kinds of things as elements of a plot in many games. So definitely agree that this game really stands out in that regard as well.
I always found it semi-comical. There's one scene in the game where you're actually trying to catch up with Eve, and you're going up this elevator, and it's easily missed if you're not like me and you don't walk around just constantly like clicking like search or trying to interact with the environment. But there's actually an empty vial on the ground.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, all right. Game on then.
Yes.
And then we had some other pretty important supporting characters that are throughout the game. Aya's partner, Daniel. And there's also the scientist from Japan, Maeda, which, Dean, if you've read the book, is he from the book?
I don't remember him from the book, to be honest. He has a pretty striking resemblance to the author, though. Hideaki Sena. If you look at pictures of Maeda's design and a picture of Sena, I mean, it's based off him. But I think between Daniel and Maeda, I think they're great, like sort of a comic duo who have it's a huge dichotomy between their personalities. But again, just with the layering, I think Daniel, it would have been easy just to make him sort of a mentor or a boss to Aya, but then they gave him the additional layers of, having the relationship with his son Ben, or the divorce from his wife, or having to step in for Baker and take over the precinct. Like, there was a lot of notes within those 6 days that I think really fleshed out his character, even though you didn't get to see him a whole lot. And then Maeda, I remember laughing like hysterically at him as a kid, and then this time around, I didn't laugh quite so much, but I really took note of what he was saying, and he references the events of the book like constantly throughout the game. And that's something that I was really taken aback with, because prior to reading it just, the dialogue sort of lost on me. But I think, the game has such a finite number of characters, which is kind of weird for, set in New York City, where you'd think there'd be people everywhere, but there really isn't a lot of NPCs around. And I think because of that, they were able to flesh out a lot of these characters in a way that made them all more endearing.
Yeah, for sure. And then lastly, we have Dr. Clamp, who is somehow involved in all of this. And, 20-year-old game, so there's going to be some spoilers here. We already kind of touched on some. But essentially, years prior, there was an accident, and Aya's sister had passed, and she was essentially kind of like harvested, or she was a donor, or organ donor. Her kidney went to Melissa. Eyes went to, or eye, was it just one eye or both eyes? I think it was just one eye.
Cornea.
Went to Aya. Cornea, thank you.
Yep.
Not the whole eye. And I forgot exactly how that connected to original Eve from Japan, where there's an element there too.
It's sort of ambiguous, because the timelines with the book and Japan don't really line up at all, right? So Mariko, who's Maya's mother in the game, was also, quote unquote, one of the main characters in the book. But the book takes place in modern times, and if Aya Bray is 25 in 1997, that would mean that Mariko had a kid at like 12 years old or something ridiculous, before the events of the book anyway. So it doesn't work. So either they retcon the timeline, or nobody really knows what happened. But Maya was sort of the first vessel for Eve, I think, in this game.
Mm-hmm. And it was that surgery that passed on those that mitochondria or whatever to Aya and Melissa, and basically took over Melissa. She became Eve. Aya, as we learn, ends up her cells, instead of succumbing, defend, and that's how she's able to withstand the melting and the fire. But Clamp was he did this, and was participating in research, and he's like aware of what's going on in the creation of the ultimate being. And a little bit, I was a little confused by or not confused, but it wasn't entirely clear on his role in.
So, so my understanding is that so Eve couldn't grow within Maya because her cells would just rebel against it, just like Aya's did. So Eve knew she had to get into another body. So by taking control of Mariko, they went to the hospital. They signed the organ donor report, which is why, Aya reads the paper and she's like, "Oh, I didn't know my mom was an organ donor or signed up for that. That's weird." It was under the influence of Eve, but knowing that she would have to go into Melissa's body, Melissa would have to take the immunosuppressants so her body didn't, reject the new organ. So with all those immunosuppressants that she's taking, the body's defenses are lowered, and Eve's able to culminate there for 20 years or whatever the timeline is. But you hear in the game that Melissa continuously goes to that American Natural History Museum and visits Clump, and that's because she needs a sperm sample without the immunity gene that would come from the father, so nothing can combat the mitochondria growth that would make the ultimate being. So that's essentially what Clump's role is to create a sperm specimen that doesn't have the immunosuppressant gene or the immunity gene that would fight off the mitochondria. And I don't know if it's his, like if he's using his own, or if he's like stealing some from the hospital and then doing some splicing from there, but that's my understanding of his role.
Yeah, my personal headcanon, I don't think it's either confirmed or denied, is that I always thought it was Klomp's sperm itself that he used, but that's just like my personal headcanon. I have no proof either way, so that'll be interesting if they ever confirm or deny that.
In this kind of story, that tends to kind of be the thing. Is there's always that guy, the rogue bad guy scientist that is enabling the evil force. So I think that's definitely a fair assumption, or a possibility that it was his sample.
Hojo, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay, so is there much else to say about the story?
Me being from New York, I have a special place in my heart for the setting, of course. And I, like many people in the poll, also want a remake of the game. And I hope that if they do a remake of the game, because one of the things that I found is that, and we'll get into the gameplay, I guess, a bit, is just that I wanted more. I felt that the game was rather... I think that was the first RPG I'd ever played. And I felt that it was rather short for an RPG. So if Square ever, makes the decision to remake the game, I would love for them to, make it longer, give us more content. And one of the things that I would love, just being a New Yorker, is maybe having more representation of the outer boroughs. But that's just my preference. So we'll see how that goes.
The game definitely is like, we're in New York. It has a lot of the sights, but it doesn't really explore much, or it's all very superficial. So yeah, I would definitely love to see more of that, or even just, I understand there's a lot of limitations, 98 and whatnot, but yeah, they could do so much with this game in a remake. I guess then jumping into the battle system. So that is another one of the more unique elements of this game. A lot of JRPGs, up until that point, tended to be turn-based. There were action RPGs and whatnot, but for me, when I played this was the first game that kind of got rid of that random encounter, like the Final Fantasies or the Dragon Quests, and did something a little bit different. So what are all your thoughts on the gameplay, the battle system? So let's start with the battle system itself. So like I mentioned, it's not random encounters, but they're triggered. Like every time you cross a certain point on the screen, you'll get into the encounter. And how does that work? Is it Final Fantasy, we had our, attack, magic, item, run. How does Parasite Eve do this? Dispose. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so you're able to move around on the battle area in real time, which lets you try to avoid enemy attacks. Then you have an ATB meter that charges; it continuously fills, and every time it completely fills, you have a few different actions you can choose from. You can just use a normal attack. You can use your parasite energy, which is essentially magic. You can use items. I don't think there was a flee or run command in this game that I'm aware of, but
I think you could.
You
Yep.
could?
Yeah, I believe so.
It backs you. It basically pushes you back, so you can't like run away and skip the encounter, and it won't. It'll push you back, and then like when you cross that spot again, you'll have to do the encounter. So you can't actually skip encounters with fleeing.
Okay, that's interesting. I guess I've never tried that. I thought it just wasn't there.
I think I did it on accident, and that's how I figured it out. I was like, oh, it is in here.
Yeah, I think a lot of people use that escape ability to when they're specifically going to, and I guess we'll talk about this more, but to farm the junk in the game to try to make a weapon. But there's like specific battles that people recommend that you can farm a lot of junk, that sort of thing. So you can steal the junk using I think one of the clubs allows you to steal items from an enemy. So you steal the junk and then you can back out of the fight, so that way you can just keep triggering the fight. I believe is something that a lot of like much more pro players than I am recommend in terms of if you really want to go for the 300 junk farming. Yeah,
that's quite the feat, and that actually makes a lot of sense. It seems like that's a really good way to go about it. So I guess, well, we can use that to segue to, so the battle system, of course, you need weapons. Parasite Eve is modern, so it's all about the guns and body armor. And again, kind of a sort of unique in regards of RPGs. You tend to have different weapons. You go to the next town, you get a new gun, so on and so forth. Where this, you do have a variety of guns that you find throughout the game, but really kind of the focus is upgrading the guns and passing on stats and abilities. So how does that work? Can somebody want to kind of explain the gun system and the upgrade system?
Sure. So every gun that you get throughout the game, and you find them in chests and sometimes drops from bosses, they have 3 core stats. They have attack, they have range, and they have the number of bullets before a reload. And some automatic weapons, for example, might have a higher attack but lower range, or fewer bullets for things like shotguns. But they also have slots for you to attribute effects to, whether that's like elemental effects like blast explosion or frost or tranquilizer darts. And so by using tools that you find throughout the game, they're just called tools, you can move stats from one weapon to another. But as sort of a risk or a byproduct of that, you lose the original weapon that you're modifying. So if you find a shotgun with a blast effect, you can put that onto your machine gun, but you'll lose the shotgun. You'll never be able to equip it again. And so it's all about playing around with which weapons you have and which weapons have the higher stats or base stats that you want to attribute your perks to, and playing around with it like that. And there's actually a lot of different combinations that you can use. And I found myself not understanding any of this the first couple times I played the game, because I don't remember getting into any of that stat stuff as a kid. This time around, I felt like it was pretty easy once you got the hang of it. But I did end up messing up one time where there was a weapon with a 7 times attack, or 7 bullets. And so I equipped that, or I moved it from one weapon to the other, thinking I would just do 7 times the damage. But all it does is it splits the total damage into 7 bullets. So I don't know what the value is of that, but I had to use a super tool to get it off my weapon. So I was a little upset with that one. But
I did the exact same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, but it is really cool because by the end of the game, I think the difficulty ramps up quite a bit, and you really have to take note of, what effects are going to work best against the upcoming bosses. What do I really need here? What sort of range do I need? How often am I reloading? What's my raw attack power? And how do I build a weapon that's going to be best suited for this fight?
So then with that, I guess I'm curious too, if any of you had like a particular type of gun you stuck with. Did you try different guns all the time? Did you kind of pick one and stick with it for a long period of time? The tool system does limit you to some extent, where you have to make some tough choices, and you get to a point where if you find another gun, it can be tricky, because if you want to move your stats over and you have a tool, you're going to lose that gun if you have extra adds to it, like as Dean said, like the trank rounds, or there's one that gives you two commands or 3 commands that you can do until you get like super tools. But for me personally, my first playthrough through the main game, the initial playthrough, pretty much once I got the shotgun, that's why I stuck with like the entire rest of the game. Is I stuck with the shotgun. I tend to like shotguns in games. I don't know what it is. They tend to be slower, and I know you can move the spread or the burst to other guns, but I stuck with that shotgun almost the entire time, and even up through my second playthrough in the Chrysler Building, up until almost the end of the Chrysler Building, when I got basically the best assault rifle in the game, or the best rifle in the game, is the first time that I finally used something other than a shotgun in like 15 hours of gameplay. How about you, Dispose? You stick with any certain guns? Like, what was your preference?
Yeah, I tend to just find something I like and stick with it. So I think the first rifle I got, I start using that, and then I think I eventually upgraded to like the M16 or whatever, whatever the best rifle is you find in the game. I just like I think it's a good mix of damage and range. But yeah, I would take the burst effect from the shotgun and the 2 commands from whatever weapon you get that from, and just I could just pretty much stand all the way across the battle area, and just with the burst I would hit multiple enemies. I mean, I would take out 4 or 5 enemies at a time, just with but it's just I feel like you can make some pretty almost game-breaking combinations here with the right abilities and everything.
Yeah, for sure. How about you, Bohan?
Yeah, so I was playing an EX game most recently, and I carried over, I forget which assault rifle it was, and I liked it because I had already put some abilities on it, but definitely I'm still experimenting with what other weapons I can find throughout the game. Like, I definitely want to explore the sewers a bit more, because there seem to be a lot of very valuable items in there, but I was a bit intimidated by the fact that it seemed like such a labyrinth. But I know that there is a shotgun in there that has a burst ability, so I definitely am looking forward to revisiting the sewers again, maybe the next playthrough, just to get that shotgun, get the burst, and just see how it impacts, how it really impacts the weapon that I'm using, because I've seen that it does seem like quite literally a game changer, especially, for instance, when you're playing against Eve as the final boss on day 5, where you can hit multiple targets at once. I feel like if I had that, I wouldn't have burned through my revives the way that I did, but yeah, so I have an assault rifle, but I'm definitely looking forward to just kind of adding more abilities to it and improving the numerical stats. So interested to keep playing the game some more.
Nice. How about you, Dean?
I sort of stayed on the M16A1 that you get from Wayne, I think, on day 2. What I really liked is that I find generally in RPGs, I just stockpile items and never end up using them. And what's nice about this one is that you can use your attack up and defense up and range up on weapons and eventually move them over to better weapons, assuming you have tools. So I did like that fact. But I was one of the guys who was sitting in Central Park just farming junk for hours. And I eventually got the P90, which is
nice.
Like Disposed, like you said, it's just a game breaking weapon. I think its base attack is like 140 or something. And
nice. I didn't have the patience to grind for that, which I could have made it a lot easier with the emulator, because you can actually like the emulator I was using has an FPS limit, and you can turn off the FPS limit and the game will actually run like 4 times as fast.
Nice.
Where it would really speed up the farming. But from what I was reading, and Bohan started to talk about this, is that one of the items in the game is junk. And unless you know, it really is just junk. There's a guy that wants to collect it for some reason, but doesn't say anything about that. And yeah, if you collect 300 junk, you could turn it in to get an option at one of the best weapons in the game. And so how long did it take you to grind for that?
I want to say about three hours total. So I used, like Bohan, you were talking about it, I used the Steel exploit. So what I did was I found there's a random encounter that you can get with a monkey and 2 birds in the zoo area of Central Park. And what you do is you just equip your club 2, which has the Steel effect, and you just club the birds to death and then escape the battle. And it'll put you right at the start, so it'll keep the encounter rate at 100%. And then you just walk right back into that battle, steal 2 more junk, walk right back in. You just keep repeating it. So you don't have to beat the battle and run away 2-3 screens and then run back and hope for the encounter rate to be back to normal. So, stealing is a lot faster than killing and doing it the old-fashioned way. So that's how I was able to get the 300, and it was only on my second playthrough that I actually sat through and did that.
Pro tip for anybody listening: that's how you do it. Then is the P90? Is that a machine gun?
It's a machine gun. I think it shoots 10 bullets. Yeah.
Okay, and I really wanted to use machine guns. I like the fast rate of fire, but I was noticing that I was doing less damage because it spreads out. Because if you have a gun that has 2 shots versus a gun that has 7 shots, they actually do the same amount of damage. It's just, as Dean said, it splits it up. But I was finding, for some reason, like, I would just burn through my ammo like way faster. Like, I actually ran out of ammo when I was using the machine gun versus all the other guns. Never had any problems. I actually would run out of ammo. So that's why I stopped using machine guns. Okay, so let's see what else. We got the parasite powers, or parasite energy. Essentially, magic system, as Disposed said. So how about those? What do we got going on with the parasite energy powers?
It's liberate all day, man. I love that attack.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so essentially, like your ATB bar, you have a parasite energy that is used and then slowly restores throughout the battle. And as you use more parasite energy, it restores more and more slowly. So if you're in a longer battle, like a boss battle, by the time you've used 3 or 4 heals, the refresh rate is really, really slow. So it sort of incentivizes you to plan when you're going to use it. Now there's a pro tip around that. By switching out your armor, you can reset that timer, and it'll refresh at the normal rate again, which is what I found I was doing a lot during the final few battles, because Liberate uses all of it. It's sort of the ultimate attack that you get at level 33 or something, and that just deals like 1,500 damage or something along those lines. So I found I was using that and then switching out my armor, refreshing, using it again, and I wasn't really bothering with energy shot or detox because I would have a poison immunity on my armor. So just really heal and liberate was all I used throughout the game.
Yeah, same here. I didn't really use much. There's like the charge shot, which is pretty good, and that uses like what remaining energy you have, I think. But yeah, for the most part, it was just healing, pretty much up until boss fights. When I had liberate, I would do that, and that's just such a cool ability.
Yeah, I found myself in the same boat. There were actually parasite energies that I don't recall even using at all. Like I don't remember using slow. I guess that slows the enemies down. I've never used that, I think, at all. I did find myself, I think there is one boss. It's an optional boss. You don't have to fight it in the warehouse on day 5. The crab, this giant crab. I found that definitely using haste, that PE ability, is essential. Because he has some really pretty devastating attacks, and you can really help yourself out and dodge a lot of it. But you definitely have to have haste up. So I found that to be particularly useful in that boss fight and other boss fights as well.
Yeah, I did use haste quite a bit. It's a great ability, but they only give you like a few rounds, like a few bar charges or whatever you want, ATB bar. Like you fire off like 3 shots or use like a few different abilities and it goes away like pretty quick. But it is pretty nice because it increases your run speed, charge speed's a little faster. Yeah, so it definitely has some trade-offs. Any other thoughts on the battle system, general gameplay, guns? Anything else to add before we move on?
I remember going back to the junk farming, and I just remember finding it so strange. This didn't happen to me personally, but I heard kind of horror stories about how you have a number of options that you can select from when you collect the 300 pieces of junk, and you go to Wayne, and then he can make a weapon for you, and you can choose among different options. And one of the options I recall is leave it to Wayne. And I remember hearing that you have to be very careful with that because he could wind up giving you back a super junk or a duper junk, something like this. And those items are completely worthless. So basically, you would have spent a few hours farming junk just to get a completely useless item if you choose that option. So I found that very trollish, but I just found it interesting that could happen.
Yeah, that's vicious.
Yeah.
That's one of those things you make sure you save before you do so. But if you don't know any better, it's like, oh man, that would be like soul crushing.
Oh yeah.
Okay, well let's check out another one of the polls that we had on Twitter at Cartridge Club NA. And the poll was, it's a zombie apocalypse, but Jill and Claire are busy. Who are you calling to save you? And for this poll, the options were Aya Brea, Regina from Dino Crisis, and Lara Croft from Tomb Raider. So I'd be curious if everybody here chose Aya. I actually did not.
I didn't either, actually.
I did choose Aya Brea.
Yeah, that's an impressive selection. Yeah, very strong.
Yeah.
Protagonist there.
So Aya won overwhelmingly with 69.3%. Then we had Regina from Dino Crisis at 16% and Lara Croft from Tomb Raider at 14.7%. And for this, not that it has to deal with anything, but I'm a huge, I'm a big Resident Evil fan to begin with, but Resident Evil obviously wasn't an option. And for this list, Tomb Raider is one of my favorite series ever, so I picked Lara Croft. But if I was able to do a write-in, it would have been Zoe from Left 4 Dead.
It's a good choice, too.
How about you, Disposed? Who did you pick?
Yeah, I actually picked Regina because if you've ever played Dino Crisis, those raptors are way harder than the zombies in Resident Evil. So I was like, if she can take those raptors, then she'll have no problem with the zombies.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they've all fought dinosaurs. So
Yeah,
That's true. Yeah.
I didn't make that connection until I saw you comment on that, and I was like, oh, was that intentional? So then, kind of moving into some of the more the design elements of the game, just how it's presented. Wanted to talk about that a little bit. So, of course, this is in the prime of the transition to 3D graphics. RPGs, I think, did things pretty interesting. Squaresoft is very well known for, on the PlayStation 1, doing a lot of pre-rendered backgrounds with 3D models. So what did you all think of what the game looks like, compared to other games at the time, how it holds up today? Just, what are your thoughts?
Just reminded me how much I love pre-rendered backgrounds, to be honest. I love these things. It was a little dark. I'll say that. And the 3D models, like the NPCs and Aya herself, they didn't really, it doesn't look great. But I've seen some high-res recreations with Unreal 4, and it sparks your imagination on what they could do still with that sort of pre-rendered background stuff. And, I do kind of wish that they implemented the toggle feature that Final Fantasy VII had, where you could press like the select button and you would have like a little finger above your head and like little arrows of all the doors and interaction points.
Genius addition for original Final Fantasy
VII. Yeah. So I just thought, well, because oftentimes I didn't know where to go, and like you said, Dispose, on that roof of the hospital, like there's nothing telling you to go down and to the left onto the little painter's lift. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah. After I played that part, this time, at first I was trying to jump down the hole, run back to the stairs he came up with, and then I just started running around. And I'm pretty sure when I played that section originally, I'm almost positive I died there a few times, which sucks because then you have to redo the boss fight because it takes you back to your last save point. Yeah, one thing I thought was also pretty, I mean, such a minor thing, but I thought it was really cool, is here's a game from 1998. They could have not done this, but mirrors have reflection, like the actual reflection. You look in the mirror, you see exactly what, is reflected back. So many games didn't bother. Why did they decide to put that time and effort to make reflective mirrors in Parasite Eve, which I thought was really cool and it looked great.
Point. I didn't even think about that, but I guess that room has a full wall of mirrors that you see everything in. And it was, so when you open the lockers, do you see the locker open in the reflection in Carnegie Hall?
That'd
be really cool.
That I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't think so, because I think it's they're not like aligned.
Oh, okay.
But I know if you walk along the mirrors and turn around and whatnot,
yeah, for sure,
you see the exact reflection.
Cool.
How about you, Bohan? Any thoughts on the design? What do you think about it?
Yeah, it definitely, to me, was reminiscent of some of the other games that I played around that time, which would have been Resident Evil 2, that sort of thing. So it kind of reminded me of that same kind of thing, pre-rendered backgrounds, that sort of thing. I definitely, one of the main reasons that I would love to see a remake of Parasite Eve is that, some of the graphics, could do with a bit of upgrading. It would be interesting to see what a Parasite Eve game would look like in modern times, and I am not referring to the third birthday, but definitely a good Parasite Eve game. It will be interesting to see what that would look like. What would the monsters look like? What would Aya look like? What would the mutations look like on, let's say, PlayStation 4 or even PlayStation 5. So definitely, I think some of the graphics unfortunately didn't age well, but it's not enough for me to just kind of say, okay, I don't want to play this game again, I love the game. Definitely very nostalgic for me. But definitely it would be interesting to see what the graphics would sort of look like in a remade version of Parasite Eve.
On the enemies, like, it's pretty graphic. These mutations of like rat's face peeling back and a dog's head splitting open. Like, I don't know, man. Doing that now, it's kind of like, I don't know, a different time.
Yeah, that was one thing I wish there was more of, and I understand why there wasn't. I'm sure doing those cutscenes was very time-consuming and very costly back then, but there needed to be a lot more of that, because we only got was it three transformations, right? The rat, the dog, and the T-Rex, and then some of the like the goo or whatever, the people goo. I had a bunch of scenes of those, but could have used more transformations. What do you think, Dispose?
Oh yeah, I really like the design of the game. I mean, I grew up with these PS1 era Final Fantasies and Resident Evils, and I still love going back and playing these games now, and I just feel right at home with the pre-rendered backgrounds and with the 3D character models, and I really like the CG animations, and maybe it's just nostalgia, I don't know, but I can definitely see how somebody in the context of 2020 might say it doesn't age well, but for me, I still think it looks great. I really like it.
So a couple notes that I made, just random things. So there's some fun little Easter eggs throughout the game, a couple nods to Final Fantasy, the American Museum of Natural History. Oh, so back up. Actually, the each location is a place where we can run around, but to get to and from locations, the game has, again, kind of a unique map system, which is basically just like an area select. But I thought that was kind of neat for an RPG. A lot of times it did the open world where you just, a little small character wandering to the next location. Well, this one, there's like, we'll just put you in the next location. Early in the game, there was a lot of story transition as they like drove back and forth in the police car. Thought that was pretty neat. And then also in the History Museum, there's actually a dinosaur display that didn't exactly look like chocobos, but it was chocobos.
On that overworld screen, if you press the select button, it actually like follows the helicopter that's going around Manhattan.
Yeah, just something they absolutely did not need to include into the game. But here's the thing where, and that was actually pretty neat, I thought, especially considering the time for them to put that where they have a follow cam on this little helicopter flying around the city. Pretty cool. Okay, so we already kind of covered the story. I had another note here about post-game. So there is kind of like quote-unquote post-game content for Parasite Eve. And this is, again, back in a time when that was still kind of a new thing. I believe Chrono Trigger was actually the first game that had like a New Game Plus mode, if I remember correctly. And Parasite Eve has something like that. It's called EX mode. So I believe we all try EX mode this time, or Bohan, did you said did you finish the game?
So unfortunately not this time. I wound up burning through like my med 4s and my revives. So my plan is to replay the game and make sure that I do the weapon upgrades, that you kind of plan out the weapon upgrades that I really want to do, so that way I can ensure that I have some med 4s and that sort of thing, especially for the ultimate being on day 6. And then ultimately I haven't tried the Chrysler building yet, but I definitely that's on my to-do list. I definitely want to, I would like to sort of tackle it. I know that there are 77 floors. It's a bit of a journey, and if I understood correctly, I know that the floors, with the exception of the boss floors, I think it's every 10th floor, I think they're randomly generated, I believe. So, it will take, sort of patience, that sort of thing. Maybe actually having like a notebook next to me to draw out a map so I'm not, sort of running around in circles, because I know that in the Chrysler Building you do get some really interesting items, weapons, that sort of thing. So my goal, my to-do list definitely is not only to tackle the Chrysler Building to get the ending that you can get at the end of that game, at the end of the Chrysler Building, but also trying to get all the items in there just to see, how many more abilities I can add to my weapons that may not even be present in any of the weapons in the regular games. So I'm very much looking forward to kind of tackling that.
Yeah. So EX mode is basically, it's a second playthrough where it resets your character level. You play through all the story again, but you get to keep your gun and your armor with all of its upgrades. So it gives you kind of a leg up, as it were. You still have to re-level and everything and get back like all your Parasite Eve powers. But yeah, as Bohan mentioned, there's the Chrysler Building. That's kind of the big thing with EX mode. And Disposed, I know you decided to give it a shot, and you gave it a shot.
Yeah, I did. I did the first 10 floors, and I think after every 10th floor, you get an elevator key that'll let you, if you want to leave, you can just come right back to, say, the 10th or the 20th or, whatever floor. So yeah, I did the first 10 floors, and I think it took me close to an hour. And, I don't think it's a very interesting environment. It's everything looks the same, and it's kind of maze-like and very repetitive. And I was like, I don't know if this is worth it. So I ended up backing out. But yeah, I'll have to YouTube like the extra stuff sometime and see what actually happens there. But yeah, I don't think there's any added story to EX mode itself. You have to complete the Chrysler Building, because I didn't notice anything. I did complete EX mode, but but like I said, didn't do the Chrysler Building. I didn't see anything new from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Dean, you did complete the Chrysler Building this time.
Yeah, I did. This was my first time trying and beating the Chrysler Building. That P90 gun made it fairly straightforward, but I don't know if I'd recommend anybody doing it, to be honest. It's just such a sarcastic number of floors, and it's all the same. I had a guide, and I can't imagine doing it without a guide, but it was literally run up a screen. Okay, the only option is up again, so I'd move up again. T intersection. Okay, so I look at my map and say, which one of these maps has T intersections? And it's not like 6-7 maps. It's like dozens and dozens of different permutations.
There's a lot.
Yeah. Oh. So I'm looking, okay, well, here are all the T intersection maps. Well, I'll take a left. Oh, there's a dead end. Here are all the T intersection maps with a dead end. And you just sort of like trial and error and narrow it down like that, and eventually get to the next one. And you do it 77 times. So it's just like, I don't know.
So I originally, when I played Parasite Eve back in '98, I'd beaten the game. I tried to do the Chrysler Building. I'm not sure how I heard about it. Might have been a gaming magazine. Might have been a friend told me about it. So didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And I just couldn't proceed any further. I think, I want to say, it's like level like 50 or something. There's a cockroach boss. And I think that's where I got stuck. Because I felt like I almost got stuck again. And basically this boss fight is this giant cockroach. And after a little bit of time, eventually it like spits out a larva. And then that larva becomes another cockroach. And basically it's the same boss, same hit points. So it keeps, if you don't kill it fast enough, it just keeps like spawning a new boss. This time I knew a little bit more of what I was getting into. I had my gun, souped up the best I could, especially after going through pretty much almost finishing EX mode as far as you can before it's the point of no return. And I was like, okay, I'll use a map because I know it was a slog last time. I ended up just giving up on the maps because I felt I was taking more time trying to determine which map I was on than it would if I was just wandering around the floors. And as Disposed said, it's a test of patience, that's for sure. It took me like somewhere between like an hour to an hour and a half per 10 floors. You can't save until you beat the boss on each 10th, 10th, 20th, 30th floor, which then you can exit the building with the key, use an elevator, save, and then go back in. I finished it. I'm very happy that I did, because anytime I thought about Parasite Eve over these last 20 years, that's like always been a thing. It's like, oh, I couldn't beat the Chrysler Building. I want to beat the Chrysler Building. I hear this alternate ending, some extra information that could be cool. I never looked it up, and I did it. It took me a long time for a person who has a short attention span, where video games is usually the answer to that and keep me focused. Chrysler Building it's a test of patience, because as everybody said, it's very samey. It's just a maze. Some of the bosses, I guess, they throw some new bosses at you, like in the later levels. And then the final encounter is a different boss fight. And I actually got stuck on it for a whole night, tried it multiple times, couldn't beat it, ended up having like switch up guns to use a different gun. And the ending that it provided, like it's an interesting little thing, but I don't really feel like I would recommend other people. They're like, if somebody knew, hey, it's gonna take me like 10 hours to get through this, is it worth it? I would personally probably tell people no, just look up the ending. But like I said, I'm glad I did it, just because that was like a thing on my checklist to do. Again, maybe if you want to do it, emulate and do that FPS limit thing and do it like 4 times speed. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, it's a tough one. Any other thoughts on EX mode or the Chrysler Building?
The EX mode for the second time, Disposed, does it still let you choose like a different gun, or is it just the same thing?
So you mean like when
you get to like name your
Wayne will engrave?
weapon and armor?
Yeah, yeah. I think you can engrave a new set, but I don't know if they both carry over. I didn't try another New Game Plus to see, but you can actually engrave another set of weapons. Okay. I think. What
did y'all name your gun? I'm curious.
R2G machine.
There you go.
I just named it Aya because he said engrave your name on it, so I was like, okay, Aya. So.
Oh, that's so funny. I did the same thing on mine. Mine is also named Aya. That's so funny.
Perfect. I was like, what's a cool shotgun name? I was like, I'll go with the boomstick, which I can't do all the letters. It was one letter too many, so I just did boomstick with a not CK with just a K. Boomstick.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. So we have another poll from the Cartridge Club NA Twitter account. Is Parasite Eve best played around Halloween or around Christmas? We had 42 votes on that one, and Christmas won at 54.8%, with Halloween at 45.2%. So what do y'all think about that? How'd you vote, if you're willing to share?
I was a Halloween guy. I thought it's a great Halloween game, but I can see both arguments.
Yeah, it takes place around Christmas, starts on Christmas Eve, but doesn't really feel like necessarily Christmassy. But I think this kind of gets to like sort of like the Die Hard debate. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie because it takes place on Christmas? So I believe I voted Halloween just because it's like, oh, it's a horror game that I think it feels more. When I think about Parasite Eve, I feel more horror than Christmas. I mean, when I think of Die Hard, I think more action movie explosions than I do Christmas.
Yeah, I definitely kind of fell more towards Christmas just because, you look at the if you look closely at like the decorations on Carnegie Hall when the game first starts, that sort of thing, like you kind of see Christmas decorations kind of here and there. There's even a scene of it zooms in the intro to like a Christmas ornament, and I think it says Christmas 1997, something like that. So just kind of like thinking about like the various sort of the little details in the settings and that sort of thing. That's what kind of tipped the scales for me towards it feeling a little bit more like a Christmas game for me.
Yeah, I went Halloween. It's funny how this game actually takes place around Christmas, but we're still kind of some of us considering it a Halloween game just because it seems like anything with a general horror theme gets kind of lumped in as appropriate for Halloween time. But yeah, the game begins on Christmas Eve, and then day 2 is Christmas Day, and then I guess the rest of the game is after Christmas actually. So, but I guess it can work for either. I guess we can always just play it again in December.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So then, kind of covered character, story, design. But as Bohan mentioned, this game has some fantastic music, so I wanted to touch on our thoughts on the music. Parasite Eve was composed by Yoko Shinomura, and she has quite the legacy of game soundtracks: Street Fighter II, Super Mario RPG, Kingdom Hearts, and a whole slew of others. So what was everybody's thoughts on this soundtrack?
It's amazing.
This was one of the first games that I remember asking myself back in 1998. I said, how do I get access to this soundtrack? Because I absolutely love it. Right from the music, I think the name of the song is Primalize, the song that plays right before you actually start the game. Plays the intro, kind of, various scenes from the game. Right from there, kind of this just interesting mix of this, opera singing with, piano and that sort of thing. And I think Yoko Shimomura did a great job of really, really setting the tone in the scenes, kind of, for instance, when Aya has these thoughts about, am I a monster, that sort of thing, really kind of, having an emotional piano piece that plays while Aya's sort of reflecting on what's happened. What does this mean in terms of who she is? I think, hands down, one of my other favorite tracks, besides the track that plays in the intro, has to be, and I think it does help to set sort of how impactful this scene is that I'm about to mention. In day 2 in Central Park, right when you get to the amphitheater where Eve is having her concert on Christmas Day on day 2. And as we all know, she then turns the people who are in the audience into slime. The song that plays there, to me, I think it really just drove the point home of just sort of how terrible the things that are happening there are, in terms of the people are quite literally being turned into slime, that sort of thing, and they just kind of form this mass that's whose ultimate purpose is to just form this protective barrier so that the ultimate being can be born. So that the song that plays there, I think it's called Kiri. It's just got this mixture of Eve singing again with this like church organ that's playing, and I think it just really, really matches kind of the imagery of that scene, and just really helps to sort of solidify the tone that's being set there. I think it's one of many great examples of just how amazing this soundtrack is, and how it really just sort of is yet another sort of element towards making Parasite Eve just a classic game.
How about you, Disposed? I know you got did a little bit more with this.
Yeah, I did a little cover of Primalize. It's on YouTube.
Nice.
But Yeah, I mean, I love the music from this game. I'm a big fan of Yoko Shimomura's work, and I think the music in this game is so unique compared to other video games, and even compared to Shimomura's other works. I feel like you can just, if you hear something from this game, you just identify it with Parasite Eve. It just doesn't really sound like anything else, and it's so effective. There's the upbeat tracks for the fights, and the very ominous sounding tracks for some of the cutscenes, and it all just works so well. And I think it's a great soundtrack. I would probably rank this as one of my all-time favorite video game soundtracks.
Very nice. How about you, Dean?
I'd agree. This soundtrack is awesome. I think, like, when did Napster come out? Like 98, 99? This was the first song I downloaded on Napster. Was Primal Eyes.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it was like I was obsessed with that song. And you're being pretty modest, I suppose. That's an awesome cover that you did on YouTube.
Oh, thank
you. You should go check it out. But yeah, all this music, like you said, Bohan, it's so atmospheric. It just fits the scene so well, and for being a cinematic RPG, I think that's really important. The music behind it. I really liked the zoo theme, like Missing Perspective. Or Urban Noise, which is the like New York over city map. Just those like PS1 synth vibes, like kind of fun, repetitive. I thought those were good, and then anything with piano. But back in August, there was a new song that came out from a band called Bring Me the Horizon. It's called Parasite Eve, and people are obsessed with it, and I could not like filter that out. So when I was looking like for Parasite Eve music anywhere on Twitter or YouTube or anything, it was always this damn song. So I've heard that song like 300 times this month. It's nuts. It has nothing to do with the game, but it's called Parasite Eve, and it's just been like clogging my playlists. So I'm tired of it.
Interesting. Yeah, right. I was actually randomly looking up. I think I was trying to look up posts on Instagram for Parasite Eve, and apparently there's some. I didn't really look into it, but it's either like an Instagram personality or it might be somebody in a band. I don't think it was related to Bring the Horizon, or what was the name of the band?
So Bring Me the Horizon.
Bring Me the Horizon, yeah. But yeah, there's a person going by the name of Parasite Eve, and I was like, I don't want to see pictures of this guy. I want to see Parasite Eve stuff. But it's obviously this Instagram personality is. Talked a lot more on Instagram than this game from 22 years ago, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I pretty much agree with what all you said about the soundtrack. I think it's another unique element. It sounds very different from a lot of other games at the time, and the track that Bohan mentioned, I really, really enjoyed that one. The organ playing it's always that, and like horror elements I think always work so well together. And then just the police station theme. Super chill. Really just kind of it seems very like 90s RPG police station. Like the song fits so well. I love it. Fantastic. So then I guess before we move on to some more community stuff, any other additional thoughts on Parasite Eve that you had that you didn't get a chance to mention? Random things you liked, disliked? What else is on your mind?
I just think people might get turned off by the idea that this is an RPG, and maybe just stress that, some RPG elements are in this, but it's a completely digestible, manageable game to go through without grinding for dozens of hours. Like you can turn this game around in 8 to 10 hours pretty easily. And there's enough quote unquote survival horror elements to keep you entertained if you're a fan of that genre as well. So don't get scared away by the fact that it's a Squaresoft late 90s RPG, because it definitely dives into other genres that you might actually like.
Yeah, and kind of going back to the survival horror, like the thing that always kind of comes to mind is like Resident Evil meets JRPG, which, you know, it doesn't describe the game very well, and kind of takes away from what it does uniquely. But in that regard, the number one complaint that people typically have about, especially the original Resident Evil games, is the tank controls. And here's a survival horror game with no tank controls, and it controls very, very well, except if you're trying to get through doorways. Then it can be a little clunky sometimes. Disposed, any other overall thoughts on the game?
I mean, I just say I love this game. I think it's just a really unique game that kind of does go off what Dean said. I mean, I think it's actually a lot more accessible than what a lot of people would initially think, being a sort of a generally considered a combination of survival horror and a JRPG, which, depending on your preferences, I think those tags could sort of scare some people off. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to get into. It's not a long game. I think it's really good. I think a lot of people should check it out.
Perfect. How about you, Bahan?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said. And I happen to be one of those people that probably, especially when I was younger, would have been scared off with the concept of an RPG, especially kind of just sort of knowing about, like the Final Fantasy games, that sort of thing. And yet I played this game. This was the first RPG game I had ever played, and I loved it. And what I find to be good about the game is something that I would also like changed about the game, if that makes sense, which is the length. It is short enough that it will not be daunting, especially when you compare it to other RPGs that you can easily sink 30 or 40 hours into. But definitely that's one of the things that I kind of wished was longer, because because I want more content in Parasite Eve, because it's just such an interesting premise, such an interesting blend of game elements, such an interesting story, that sort of thing, interesting visuals. So I just wanted more of that. I do also actually want to mention something interesting that I had heard a little after Parasite Eve came out. There was this article that came out, I believe it was on IGN, where Madonna, the pop singer Madonna, actually apparently acquired the rights to making a Parasite Eve movie. Not to be confused with the Parasite Eve movie that came out in Japan, but a new Parasite Eve movie. Square called IGN and said, no, she does not have the rights, but IGN is saying, no, we have a pretty reputable source. I believe it was a news site. I'm not even sure if this news site exists anymore. Coming Attractions, that were adamant. They reported that Madonna purchased the movie rights for Parasite Eve. As far as I know, I don't think anything came of that, because I didn't hear of any Parasite Eve movie, but I remember hearing that around 1999 and finding that just so intriguing, so interesting. But I guess we'll see if anything ever comes of it, even all these years later. But I just found that to be kind of strange. Among all the people in the world, Madonna getting the rights to a Parasite Eve movie was pretty interesting to hear.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I think you've all summed it up pretty well. I think Parasite Eve is definitely a game that people should give a chance, especially straddling different genres, the survival horror, the RPG. It doesn't fully jump into either genre. It pulls different elements. I think it's very accessible. I really appreciate the fact for, again, kind of going back to when this game was made, the things that it did. The setting was unique. There's a lot of modern day games now, but back then it wasn't entirely common, especially kind of like a serious approach in the real world. I thought was interesting. And then again, maybe it's less of a thing of note these days, but even having like a female focused lead to this extent, unlike our unnamed lead, like Samus, like it was kind of a side note almost for those games. But here we got a full-fledged game focused not in a franchise, technically, that had a female lead, and it was a great character, and wasn't, like I said, I'm a big fan of the Tomb Raider games, but obviously there's some elements that maybe drew people to Tomb Raider at the time, where this was not using selling sex to get people interested in the game. Where I don't necessarily think Tomb Raider did. I think it's more the advertising for those games. But I think you get my point. And we got another poll here. Final poll that we had for Parasite Eve. And again, if you want to get involved with polls in future months, Cartridge Club NA on Twitter. And this poll was, which is your favorite Parasite Eve game and why? So I don't have the whys, but we got the results here anyways. So out of 61 votes, overwhelmingly 54.1% of people have not played Parasite Eve, and that's too bad. But for people answering the poll, the second was Parasite Eve 1 at 36.1%, then Parasite Eve 2 only 6.6%, and Third Birthday 3.3%. Obviously, I'd played Parasite Eve in the past, but I have not played Parasite Eve 2 or Third Birthday. I do have Parasite Eve 2. It's in my backlog. I was kind of waiting for a time that I was going to replay Parasite Eve 1 before jumping into Parasite Eve 2. So I hope to play Parasite Eve 2 sometime soon. I got some games I need to play first, but I would like to do that. And I've heard lots of mostly negative things about Third Birthday, but I still would like to check that out myself. So curious for all of you. It sounds like, Bohan, you've played the whole series?
So I've only played Parasite Eve 1 to completion, and I played a little bit of Parasite Eve 2. I actually have not played Third Birthday, but like you, I've heard mostly negative reviews about the Third Birthday, and I actually kind of saw an in-depth review on YouTube not too long ago. So yeah, in terms of sort of my thoughts on the sequels, like I said, I only played a tiny bit of Parasite Eve 2, but and that was years ago, but from what I heard, Parasite Eve 2, interestingly, is actually, a lot of people say that it much more closely resembles a Resident Evil game than the original Parasite Eve, which I thought was interesting. And what's ironic to me is that what I remember my impression being when I played a bit of it a few years back is that the irony is, as big of a fan as I am of the Resident Evil series, and I'm a very big fan of it, I actually did not like that Parasite Eve 2 was kind of veering more towards the Resident Evil direction, because what I found so amazing about the original Parasite Eve 1, the original Parasite Eve, was just that it was its own thing, which was, to me, pretty remarkable considering it did come out in 1998, the same year as Resident Evil 2, but it was its own thing. It had the horror elements, it was an RPG, but it was its own experience, and so the irony for me of Parasite Eve 2 kind of more closely resembling a series that I love and me not liking it as much is definitely there. I just kind of wanted it to sort of continue with the identity that I think it set up pretty well with the original Parasite Eve.
Excellent. Dean, have you played any of the other games in the series?
Yeah, I went to visit my grandparents who lived in Arizona when I was much younger, maybe 1999, 2000, and I bought Parasite Eve 2 on a whim at a store down there, and my cousin actually had a PS1, so was able to play that while I was supposed to be visiting my grandpa. So I had a lot of experience with that one growing up as well, but I've never played Third Birthday, so I would like to.
How about you, Disposed?
Yeah, I definitely voted for Parasite Eve 1 in the poll, and I left a comment, and it actually, Bohan actually said a lot of what I said in the comment, so that made me want to pull it up. I'm just going to read it here, and I wrote, "The first is my favorite by far. Despite being a big survival horror fan, I was kind of disappointed that the sequel was a more straightforward Resident Evil style game and sacrificed a lot of what made the original so unique and interesting." And then I wrote, I never played Third Birthday, but yeah, I played Resident Evil 2 it's been a long time ago. I might have still been in high school or early college, but yeah, like I said, I was kind of disappointed that it was, more Resident Evil style game, even though I am a big fan of that. But so I don't have a very positive opinion of that game, but I was actually watching some gameplay video of it recently, and as I was watching it, it did look like it retains a little bit of sort of the RPG elements and like the magic or ability system, and it really made me want to check it out again. I think I would like it more now, kind of knowing what to expect and having the right expectations for it. But yeah, it's based on my past experience, I'm not a huge fan of it, but I want to give it a replay sometime.
Cool. And then actually I found a quote anecdote that I thought was pretty interesting. There was an interview with IGN with Yoshinori Kitase, the director of the original Final Fantasy VII and producer of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and he thinks, quote, it would be a waste to not use the game's character again in some form. And what I thought was kind of interesting about that was Kitase was also the producer for Third Birthday. So it's like, it's interesting. So, here's a person, the Final Fantasy Remake, so highly regarded, might give him a little bit more power to do projects that he's interested in the future. And maybe Parasite Eve will be one of them. Who knows? I don't know about that Third Birthday part, though. All right, so let's talk about some community impressions here. Of course, the Cartridge Club is all about community and everybody participating. So for this time we're doing the 3-word, or describe Parasite Eve in 3 words. We're going to take turns here reading over some community impressions. So I will start this off. RPG Tour Guide says, chilling transformative scenes. And then I also want to shout out RPG Tour Guide has been doing an amazing job retweeting and is working on his own Let's Tour of the game. Then RF Gen Playcast said, I don't understand. I like it.
That's good.
Daniel Greenberg from Winter Ion, Twisted AF. I'm assuming that was shortened. Assuming everybody knows what AF means. Mauser from Winter Ion says, the Cell's Powerhouse. Then we got Morsius from Winter Ion, what the shit? And then Bossum Burf says, my RPG introduction.
Nice. We have some more here. So Kat Bauman said here, never attend operas. Kat has been creating some amazing fan art of the game each and every day for Inktober. Super talented. Canadian Retro said, absolutely freaking brilliant. SCPH7503 says, goopy existential crisis. Izu Nundara says, mitochondria. All right. Return of the Living Spoodle said, cerebral survival horror. And Manga Historian said, godly, beautiful masterpiece.
All right. We have RHL Pixel says, Aya kicks ass.
She does.
Yeah,
she does.
Agreed.
Then we have 2P Project says, mitochondria take over Manhattan. And 2P Project has been streaming his playthrough all month, so that's cool.
Nice.
We have Nintendo Hodge says, save your game. That's very important. We have Self Destructo, warming holiday tale.
Sure, yeah.
And then we have Stuart, aka Red McKnight, says Super Omega Freaky. And Red McKnight just joined the Cartridge Club Discord, so everybody be sure to go over and give him a warm welcome. Then we have Zach Parkerson from the GoCast, says somehow strangely educational. I'm not sure about that one. It might be some failed biology grades.
We got some more here. We have Boomer Pixels saying needs a remaster. We have
Yes.
George Haverdink saying I want a remake. And Carlos Rubert saying needs a remaster. So a lot of fans of seeing this come back. And then these next few are from the Cartridge Club community page over on Facebook. So we have Chris Sanderson saying Mutant Maniac Guns. Rob Pothar saying Creepy Baby Nightmares. Derek Ward saying Deserves M rating. And Travis Goss saying I Miss It. Ooh, and look, a late entry coming in from Twitter from a user called Madonna. Said movie is coming.
You're kidding. That's so funny.
Nice.
That's great.
Excellent. So thanks for all those community impressions. That is going to do it for this episode of the Cartridge Club Game of the Month podcast. The Game of the Month for Season 8, Episode 3 in November 2020 is Banjo Kazooie, which is available via Nintendo 64, Xbox 360 Rare Replay, and Xbox Game Pass for PC. Then for December will be Life is Strange. Additionally, there is the sister podcast, the PC-focused Quick Save Club, who will be covering Torchlight 2 as their Game of the Month for October and November. And again, if you would like to get involved with the club, I'd encourage you to follow us on Twitter at Cartridge Club NA. You can also visit our Discord, which has a lot of discussions this month for Parasite Eve. There's also the Cartridge Club forums at cartridgeclub.org and the community Facebook, or the Facebook community and group pages. For those of you interested in supporting the club beyond a review of the on the podcast app of your choice, I'd like to mention that the club is entirely funded by pledges made from members of our community. We are extremely grateful to those supporters, and if you're interested in becoming one of them, please look into how you can do that at patreon.com/cartridgeclub. So as we're closing things out here, I would like to give everybody a chance to shout out how people can get a hold of you, how they can follow you. If you have YouTube or if you do Twitch or live streaming, feel free to mention those. So let's just go down the list here. Bohan, you want to let people know how they can follow you and what you got going on online?
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks for having me for this discussion of Parasite Eve. So if anybody wants to follow me on Twitter, I'm at BohanGirl84. That's 84. The numbers at the end there. I also stream every week on Trovo, which is a relatively new site. So you can catch my streams. I stream games like this, Parasite Eve and whatnot, Resident Evil. So I'm at trovo.live/BohanGirl84.
How about you, Disposed Hero?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at ThisDisposedHero, and also recently created a YouTube channel where I'm Disposed Hero VGM. I'm just doing covers of various video game music, and still pretty early going, so I'm still kind of in the feeling out process, but that's been fun to do so far. But yeah, this has been fun. Thanks for having me, guys.
How about you, Dean?
You can find me on Twitter at round_2_gaming, and you can find me over in the Cartridge Club Discord quite a bit as well. But yeah, like everybody said, thanks so much for having me on as a guest. This was a really fun game to talk about.
Excellent. And then if anybody wants to follow me, check out what I do. I am on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as The Game Grinder. If you just search that name, you will likely find me. And then also on my Game Grinder page, I co-host the Game Tenants podcast. And then, of course, thank you all for taking the time and joining me for this episode. And then to everyone listening, we look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you for joining us. CC Unite.